wow, is this like every other book that I've read before? Yes. I really like it. Alright, hello everyone, I have my reading journal ready, so that means that it's time for another reading wrap up. Today I'm going to talk about the 5 books that I read in the month of November, which includes a lot of great ones, one disappointing one, and one that I genuinely don't know if I love or despise. Let's just immediately hop into the books that I read this month. I got back into listening to audiobooks again because I listened to 2 audiobooks. Let's begin with the first physical book that I read this month, which was A Deadly Education, the very hyped dark academia book by Naomi Novik. This is about a girl who is a magician and she goes to a magician school that has no teachers, no classes, just all these students that kind of have to survive and learn magic on their own, otherwise they get eaten and killed by demons. You know, it's just your average school environment. Nothing weird here. This one was a disappointment to me. As you may know, I'm a huge fan of Naomi Novik's Uprooted and Spinning Silver, so I was very excited for this one, even though I already knew from other reviews that it was going to have a very different tone. But still, this one ended up very much disappointing me. It wasn't bad, I just really expected a lot more and I didn't particularly super enjoy it. Okay, so the best way I can describe this is this way. So you know, on BookTube we often talk about whether you're a character-based reader or a plot-based reader. I'd say that this book is neither of those. It's a setting-based story. The plot is kind of non-existent. It's basically just our main character Elle and peers at this school trying to survive and not get killed by demons and just survive until graduation. There's no antagonist, there's no villain or anything, and I know a story doesn't need to have an antagonist or a villain. I just personally really love it if it does, but it doesn't need to. This one doesn't. And then the characters, our main character is kind of the shining star of the book. Elle is very sassy, very snarky, she's very clearly kind of evil, but still there's not a lot of depth. Most of the story kind of revolves around the setting because it takes place in this school that's kind of alive and there are all these monsters, and throughout the book there's just constant exposition, which is what a lot of people, including me, turned off from this book. You will constantly just have the main character explain random stuff about random types of demons or how this school works or how the witch and wizard enclaves work, and there's a lot of just info dumping that is told to you instead of shown. It's kind of the charm of the book, that you're kind of constantly learning about this cool place, but it just really wasn't for me. I need a story that kind of has a goal that we're working towards, whether that's through the plot or through the character's motivation. My favorite part was the fact that the main character was such a, I guess, kind of like unique character for a YA fantasy, and I really liked her dynamic with her friend slash maybe potential love interest Orion, because they kind of didn't like each other. They were kind of opposites and they genuinely didn't like each other, not in a oh my gosh we're gonna fall in love way. I'm making fun of it, but that's actually my favorite trope. But here it was genuinely like 2 people that just were opposites, but they just kind of became friends, and I liked their dynamic. But other than that, there's nothing about this book that particularly wowed me, so that's unfortunate. Then the next book that I read was To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra. Christo, if you watched my reading vlog, you know that I really enjoyed this book. I gave this 4.5 stars. The first YA fantasy this year that I read that I actually really liked. For some reason I've been having a lot of bad luck with YA fantasy this year. I haven't read that many, and the ones that I did read, I know none came over 3 stars. This one, beautiful. It reminded me why YA fantasy is such a beautiful thing. Little Mermaid retelling. We follow Lyra, who is a siren. She lives in the sea and she hunts princes and she steals their hearts because that's just what she likes to do. And then we also follow Elian, who is a prince, and he in his free time goes on the sea as a pirate because he wants to hunt the sirens that are killing all the princes. I think you can see where this is going. And you follow both of their perspectives. But the whole point of their story is that Lyra gets turned into a human. She gets legs from her evil sea mother. So she infiltrates the ship of the prince, but her plan is to kill him. If you look at this, you think this is a story that's gonna take place in the sea, in the ocean with mermaids, but it's actually a pirate story. Beautiful. I love that. They go on this journey along these different countries. And those are my favorite types of story.
I will say that these countries kind of make no sense world building wise, as in there's a country of weapons and a country of technology and a country of romance. So if you really care a lot about your world building, this book is not for you.
I understand that a lot of people found this book extremely boring and didn't care. I like that this book gave me kind of a sense of warmth and coziness and nostalgia, because they were just, you know, on a journey, you know, talking to different people, making plans. I like those kind of stories. They makes me feel warm and cozy inside. And especially if added to that are also a lot of really great action scenes. This is also very much marketed as an enemies to lovers. It's more like a hate to love in my opinion, because she's undercover. Leonie and the prince doesn't know that she's his enemy, you know? There's a lot of banter between Lyra and Elian, and what I really liked is that the romance really doesn't take over the story. It's very much in the background of a story, and it's more, I guess it's kind of, the romance is kind of just a medium for the character development, because in essence this is just a book about two people and they struggle with becoming who they are instead of doing what is expected of them. And through their journey, through their character development, they also kind of develop feelings for each other. And I thought that was really beautiful, and I really like it. And if that isn't enough reason to convince you to read this book, it's also a standalone. Yes, a YA fantasy standalone. I know those things are rare, but here we have one. Also, the sun is kind of peeking. Hello, welcome to this wrap-up. We welcome you. Have a seat. I am gonna close the curtain. I listened to the audiobook of the novella All Systems Red by Martha Wells. It's the first book in the Murderbot Diaries. This book was recommended to me quite often in my comments. Just remember that whenever I read those comments, it really sounded like something I would enjoy, so I decided to listen to it. Let me just explain what it's about first. So the Murderbot Diaries is about this robot that calls itself Murderbot, but it's basically just a security guard robot that is there to protect the humans that are going on exploration missions to other planets. It's mostly just about this robot, and you're in its head, and it just talks about, you know, what it's like to be a robot. And it's very sassy and funny. Like, nothing funny is happening in this book. It's just the way that the Murderbot narrates is really funny. It talks about how, you know, it has downloaded all these TV shows. It's just kind of weird that you really relate to this robot. And so that kind of gives him this personality. I say him, I'm going on a tangent here, but what I really liked is to see how different people gender this robot, because it calls itself it. I call it him because in the audiobook it's narrated by a male voice, so I just imagined it as a him. Whereas if you go onto Goodreads into reviews, you'll see reviews that say it, but there are also reviews that refer to the robot as her. And I just thought it was interesting to see how different people assign different genders to this very genderless robot. The thing is, this Murderbot is made out of part technology and part human tissue. So the question is kind of like, is it part human? Is it not? You know, how human does something have to be in order to be treated humanely? And I thought that was very interesting. But I will say the reason that I'm only giving this 3 stars is because the plot I genuinely didn't care about. I don't know, I tend to have a hard time with science fiction stories like that. As soon as there are like drones and stuff, I kind of tend to lose interest. Maybe it's also because I was listening to an audiobook, but just the plot itself I wasn't really into. But I did really like the star of this novella is just the main character, this Murderbot, and kind of the question of like, how should we treat a robot. Please let me know if you think it would be a good idea for me to continue into the series. The last two books, one of them was one that I simultaneously hated but also kind of loved, but before we go into that I want to talk about the audiobook White Fragility that I listened to, which I really enjoyed. This is a book that is about, well, it says it on the cover, white fragility and why white people get so defensive when the story becomes about race. Just full disclosure, this book is written by a white woman and it does center whiteness basically. If you want to learn about racism, it's a good idea to read books written by people of color about their experiences, but this book specifically just is kind of written for white people. It kind of just explains all the influences that, you know, like white supremacy, etc. has had on the world, and I think it was very insightful. I would highly recommend it. I guess it would be interesting to share maybe the most kind of basic things that I learned from it instead of just saying, oh, good nonfiction book, please read it. I like in my wrap-ups to talk about some of the contents of the nonfiction book that I read, because I don't think spoilers are really a thing for nonfiction books. So the thing that I want to share about this book specifically is kind of the 3 things that result in white fragility, kind of the lies that we believe. And those 3 things are individualism, objectivity, and distinction between good and bad. The first one, individualism, is kind of the idea that we have that everything we do just kind of lives in a vacuum. You know, we just think, oh well, I don't actively do anything that's racist, so I cannot be racist, instead of thinking about how it's a system that we are all contributing to, even by little things that we might be doing. The second thing is objectivity, that we believe that we can be completely objective. That's not how our psychology works, that's not how our brains work. We are completely subjective and constantly have these prejudices that we can't deny. And the third one is kind of the distinction that only bad people are racist. You know, the idea that if you're a good person you can't be racist because only very terrible people that just wish people dead could be racist, whereas in reality you could be a true angel and still do something that contributes to a system of racism. I highly recommend reading this book. It works very well on audiobook, and now my camera is gonna die, so I'm gonna do that. Okay, we're back again. The book that I wanted to talk about, that I just don't know whether I want to give it 4 stars or 2, is A Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerri Maniscalco. This is kind of a murder mystery fantasy book that takes place in, I think it's supposed to be 1800s Italy. Spoiler alert, you barely notice anything about the historical context at all.
I just realized that the year where this book takes place is actually never specified. The setting of this book is so poorly described that I had to make up a time period in which this book takes place.
And we follow our girl Amelia, whose twin sister Victoria dies at the beginning of the book. She finds her murdered, so she summons a demon from hell. There are 7 princes of hell. They all represent a deadly sin, and she summons the Prince of Wrath. And then he's bound to him, and then they're gonna go on this journey to find who her sister's killer is. Fantastic setup for a fantastic book, and that's also like the main reason why this book was so ridiculously addictive, is because 1, you have a murder mystery, and that always makes me want to keep reading, and second of all, excuse me, demon princes of hell who are the love interest. Do you know these advertisements for these dating play apps where you choose kind of like episode where you choose what you're gonna say, and then based on that you find a boyfriend, and then there's like 7 boyfriends that all are like one of the deadly sins, and then one of them ends up being your boyfriend? Those games, that's this book. That's this book. Just gonna admit here that I think that's a fantastic concept. But the rest, where do I even begin? Gonna explain a little bit why I didn't like it here, but if you want to hear me go like full-on spoiler on why I didn't like this is actually also the book club pick of the World Readers Book Club, of the book club that I have with Sabine. Somewhere in January there's gonna be a live show, and if you want to be kept up to date with that you should follow us on Twitter. But let me just Let me just start out by saying that our main character, Amelia, loses her twin sister. Like, she finds her murdered, brutally murdered, like she sees that. You would think severely traumatizing, but it just does not influence the book at all. And there are sometimes passages where she will describe that she's being washed over with grief and that she's crying, but I didn't feel a thing. And I don't know if that makes me a complete psychopath with no empathy, or if that means that the book did not make me care about this at all. I think it's the latter. Also, we have the very, very cliche thing where the sister is like the outgoing fun one, and now Amelia is like, oh, but I'm so shy, I could never be like my sister, I need to learn to be more outgoing as she is. And I'm like, whoa, is this like every other book that I've read before? Yes. I'm sorry, I'm being way too harsh on this. There are multiple things that I won't talk about because they're spoilers that just didn't make sense to me, that were not explained, that were just clearly just there because it's kind of cool or because it's convenient for the plot, but had absolutely no explanation to it. The revelations in this book, because it is a murder mystery, were extremely boring to me because they either were not foreshadowed at all, or they were foreshadowed so much that I could see it coming immediately. If I read a murder mystery, I want to have that revelation moment where I'm like, oh my gosh, I did not see that coming. Whoa, I should have known. All the things are coming together now. But no, it's just, you have a revelation, and then when you figure out who it is, that person gives you extra information on why that person did it that you couldn't have known before, and it's like... Then it's also supposed to be a very much an enemies to lovers. Of course, there's gonna be a romance between Amelia and the Prince of Wrath. Kerri and Maniscalco really wants you to believe that these two characters are enemies and have an enemies to lovers dynamic, because the main character is constantly talking about how he's her enemy and she should never feel good about him because he's her enemy. But throughout the entire book, they work together. They are cooperating throughout the entire book. It's very clear that, yes, Wrath is kind of bad and you shouldn't be trusted, but are they enemies? No. And they are working together to find a killer. They are on the same side. I personally would not categorize that as an enemies to lovers. Yes, it's a hate to love. They don't like each other. Are they enemies? Not as much as Kerri Maniscalco wants you to believe that they are. And on top of that, they both have no personality, which made the romance very boring, but I guess in that way they really matched together because they both did not have a personality. The love interest, Prince Wrath, is just your typical dark, broody, the Darkling / Rysand ripoff that has absolutely no personality or anything of interest to him. Like, you know, I'm always a sucker for those kind of love interests. Even though they are Darkling / Rysand ripoffs, I tend to like them anyway. This one, so boring. Let me end on a high note and just re-emphasize the fact that this book really kept me reading. It was extremely addictive. It was fun to read, and I think you would really enjoy this if you're willing to ignore all the glaring annoyances and things that might frustrate you. But yeah, you should definitely read this for the book club. This was absolutely not a really bad selling point on trying you to get to read the book. If you like this book, I totally get it. Like, I really get why people would love this book. It just frustrated me. Anyway, I just want to quickly mention the first book on my TBR for December is The Silvered Serpents. I've been saying that I am going to read this very often, but now I'm actually going to read this. So this is the first book that I'm going to start reading in December, just so you know that. Last thing that I want to say is you should follow me on Instagram and on Twitter, but especially on Instagram because I'm posting more there. Anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this reading wrap up. Let me know what your favorite book of this month was, and I will see you soon in another video. Goodbye!